She had survived ambushes and mountain passes that don't appear on any map. She had pulled dying soldiers out of burning vehicles while taking fire from 3 directions. She had kept men alive with nothing but her hands, a tourniquet, and 11 years of training that carved itself into her bones. And now a cop had a gun pointed at her face in a hospital hallway because she looked tired and her badge was turned the wrong way. Officer Derek Vaughn didn't know any of that. He saw a young woman in scrubs at 2 in the morning, shoulders tense, eyes red from a 12-hour shift, and he decided she looked suspicious. He decided she looked like someone he could handle. That was the first mistake he'd make tonight. It wouldn't be the last. Before you follow this story to the end, and trust me, you're going to want to stay until the final scene. Hit subscribe, leave a like, and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go. Crestwood Regional Medical Center sat at the edge of Denver's west side like a building that had been tired for 20 years and just never got around to stopping. The ER entrance faced a 4-lane street that smelled like diesel and fast food at this hour, and the fluorescent lights above the ambulance bay had been flickering since November. Nobody had fixed them. There was always something more urgent. Olivia Hayes had been working Crestwood's overnight ER rotation for 14 months. She was 29, 5'6", and had the kind of stillness about her that people sometimes mistook for indifference until something went wrong, and then they understood it for what it was: control. She wasn't pretty in a way that made people stop and stare. She was pretty in a way that you noticed after the fact, after she'd already handled 3 things at once and never raised her voice doing it. She had dark circles under her eyes that weren't from tonight specifically. They were from years, the kind of circles you get when sleep has been an afterthought for so long your body just stopped filing the complaint. It was 2:07 a.m. when she came out of Trauma Bay 2 and walked to the supply closet at the end of the East Corridor to restock her kit. She'd just spent 40 minutes working a construction worker with a crushed forearm and a blood pressure that kept crashing. He was stable now. She needed saline flushes, fresh gloves, a replacement tourniquet for the one she'd burned through, and about 4 uninterrupted minutes of not talking to anyone. She got approximately none of that. "Hey." The voice came from behind her. She turned. Officer Derek Vaughn was standing about 8 feet away, one hand on his belt, the other loose at his side. He was mid-30s, broad through the shoulders, with a face that had learned early on that authority was a costume you could put on, and most people wouldn't look close enough to check the seams. He was stationed at Crestwood 3 nights a week as part of a security contract the hospital had with the Denver PD. Most of the staff knew him. Most of them found ways to stay busy when he was nearby. "Badge," he said. Not asked, said. Olivia looked at him for a moment. Her badge was clipped to her scrub top, turned slightly inward from where she'd leaned over a gurney rail for the better part of an hour. She reached up and straightened it without a word. Vaughn didn't move. "I need to see you pull it out. Hold it up." "You can read it from there." She turned back to the supply closet. She heard him take 2 steps forward. "I said hold it up." Olivia turned again, slower this time. She held the badge out, flat in her palm. Vaughn leaned in like he was studying it, though anyone standing there could see the photo matched. The name was clear. The department seal was intact. He wasn't looking at the badge. He was making her hold her arm out. "Olivia Hayes," he read, like he was sounding out the syllables for the first time. "How long you been working here?" 14 months? Night shift only? Mostly. You got authorization to be in this corridor? She let a beat pass. I work in this corridor. That's not what I asked. Olivia closed the supply closet. She didn't slam it, she just closed it, and then she turned and looked at Vaughn with the patient, utterly flat expression of someone who had been in rooms with men who actually scared her and had learned the difference. Is there a specific concern, officer, or are we just doing this? Something shifted in his face. Not anger exactly, more like recalibration. The look of a man who had decided she was going to be a project. Yeah, actually, he said. I've had a complaint. Staff member reported seeing someone matching your description taking supplies without logging them. Who? That's not your business. If there's a complaint with my name on it, it's absolutely my business. What's your problem? Vaughn's voice dropped slightly, which was its own kind of escalation. The lowering of volume that wasn't softness, it was warning. I'm doing my job. You're making this weird. I'm doing my job too, Olivia said. And my job requires the supplies in that closet, which I've been logging correctly for 14 months. If someone filed a complaint, I'd like to speak with my charge nurse. Your charge nurse isn't the one dealing with you right now. I am. She held his gaze. I can see that. He didn't like that. The muscles along his jaw went tight. He stepped to the side, putting himself between her and the corridor, back toward the main ER. Not blocking her, technically. Just occupying space in a way that meant she'd have to move around him. You got a chip on your shoulder, he said. You know that? I've seen nurses like you before. Think because you put in long hours, it means you get to talk back to law enforcement, like you're something special. I'm not talking back. I'm answering your questions. You're being difficult. I asked to speak with my charge nurse. That's a reasonable request. Vaughn took another step toward her. Not fast, deliberate. The kind of movement designed to make you take a step back, and when you didn't, designed to remind you that he was bigger. You think you're better than this job? Is that it? Because from where I'm standing, you look like a tired nurse at 2 a.m. who's about 30 seconds away from making a really bad decision. Olivia didn't step back. She didn't step forward either. She stood exactly where she was and said quietly, I think you should be careful about how you're framing this conversation. Vaughn laughed. It was a short, dismissive sound, the kind designed to make the other person feel small. Careful, right. He unclipped his radio, made a show of holding it. Tell you what, either you come with me to the security office and we sort this complaint out the right way, or I call this in as non-compliance and we do it the harder way. Your choice. I haven't done anything wrong. Then you've got nothing to worry about, do you? She looked at him for 3 full seconds, not calculating exactly, just taking measure of what she was dealing with, the way she'd been trained to assess a situation before deciding how to move through it. Vaughn had the confidence of a man who'd never had a door opened in his face before. He was used to people folding. The hospital staff folded because they needed their jobs. Patients folded because they were scared and sick. This corridor at this hour had always gone his way. She walked toward the security office, not because she was afraid, because she understood that some conflicts had to move through their stages before they could be resolved, and the fastest way out of this particular one was to follow the process until the process revealed him. The security office was a small, cluttered room off the main lobby with 2 desks, a bank of monitors, and a smell like old coffee and carpet that hadn't been shampooed since the building went up. Vaughn's partner for the night, a younger officer named Bryce, who always seemed vaguely apologetic about existing in the same room as Vaughn, looked up from his phone when they came in. Have a seat, Vaughn told her. I'll stand. He sat down across the desk from her, pulled out a notepad with the slow deliberateness of a man who knew the gesture conveyed authority, even if nothing got written. Name of your supervisor? Dana Reyes, charge nurse, overnight ER. You want her number, or should I just call her directly? I'll handle the contact. Then handle it. I'd like this resolved so I can get back to my patients. Vaughn set the notepad down. You know, the complaint that came in, it wasn't just about the supplies. She waited. Somebody said they saw you behaving erratically, moving through restricted areas, acting agitated. Acting agitated, Olivia repeated. Their words. And who filed this? Like I said, I know what you said. She kept her voice level. I'm asking again, because a complaint that vague from an anonymous source at 2 a.m. directed at a nurse who's been working here without incident for over a year sounds less like a legitimate concern and more like something else. Vaughn leaned back in his chair. Something else like what? I don't know. You tell me. The air in the room changed. Bryce had gone very still on his side of the room, eyes on his phone, but clearly not looking at it. You got a real attitude problem, Vaughn said. I've been told that before, Olivia said. Usually by people who confused attitude with not being willing to be pushed around. That was the wrong thing to say, or the right thing to say, depending on what came next. She knew it when she said it, and she said it anyway, because there are moments when you have to decide whether you're going to shrink yourself for someone else's comfort or hold your shape, and Olivia Hayes had made that choice a long time ago, in situations considerably more dangerous than this one. Vaughn stood up. He wasn't a small man. He was using that now in the way he sometimes did, positioning himself so his height became part of the conversation. "Let me be real clear with you," he said. "I can make a call right now that has you suspended pending investigation. One call. I've done it before. You want to keep pushing this, keep up with the attitude, we can go that route." "If you believe there's been an infraction, file the report," Olivia said. "That's the process. Use it." "Or," Vaughn said, "you can apologize for the disrespect. We close this out tonight, and you go back to your shift." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not apologizing." He moved around the desk. Not fast. Slow. And his hand went to his holster. Not drawing, just resting there, which was its own kind of language, the kind that said, "I have options, you don't." "You want to think about that?" The room was very quiet. Olivia's heart rate was elevated. She was aware of that, and she was also aware that her heart rate had been considerably more elevated in considerably worse situations, and she had not panicked in those situations, and she was not panicking now. What she felt, more than fear, was a kind of cold clarity, the narrowing of attention to exactly what was in front of her, the distance between her and Vaughn, the position of his hand, the fact that Bryce still wasn't moving, the camera in the corner of the room, a small dome unit, its red indicator light steady. "Take your hand off your holster," she said quietly. Vaughn smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Excuse me?" "You're in a hospital," she said. "There are trauma patients 30 feet from this room. Take your hand off your holster." He didn't. He took a step closer instead, close enough that she could smell the coffee on him, and he said low and certain, "I think you need to reconsider your tone." "I think you need to reconsider your position," she said. His hand tightened on the holster, and then the radio on Bryce's desk crackled. "All available units, trauma bay, incoming critical, military transport, ETA 3 minutes, requesting ER staff, all available units." Vaughn didn't move immediately. Neither did Olivia. "That's for me," she said. "I'm not done with—" "A critical trauma patient is 3 minutes out." Her voice was flat and absolute. "Either arrest me right now and put that on record, or let me do my job." Vaughn stepped back, not graciously. There was nothing gracious about it. He stepped back like he was choosing a different problem to solve later and just hadn't decided how yet. "We're not finished," he said. "No," she agreed. "We're not." She walked out of the security office and back toward the ER, and she was already shifting gears before she hit the double doors, already pulling the logistics of a critical trauma intake into the front of her mind. Military transport meant injury pattern that might be different from a civilian MVC or a shooting. Blast injury possible. Burns. Penetrating trauma with field dressings applied under combat conditions rather than clinical ones, which meant she needed to assess for tourniquet time and check the field notes carefully. Dana Reyes met her at the doors, already moving. Dana was 44, had been a charge nurse for 11 years, had the quality of a woman who had outsmarted every crisis she'd ever met. "Where were you?" "Security office. Vaughn pulled me in for a complaint." Dana's expression said everything and nothing all at once. "There'll be time for that. We've got incoming, military special ops, gunshot wounds, abdomen and left thigh, field stabilized, but BP was tanking in the transport. They've got a team with him." "A team?" 3 personnel, military. They've been on the radio with the flight crew." Dana was already handing her a fresh pair of gloves. "Your lead on triage. Kapoor's taking surgical consult." "Got it." The ambulance bay doors opened and the gurney came through fast, pushed by 2 paramedics and flanked by 2 people in tactical gear, who were not paramedics and were not medical staff, and who moved through the ER entrance with the practiced, deliberate efficiency of people who had done this before in places with considerably less roof over their heads. Olivia was at the gurney before it cleared the bay doors. The patient was male, late 30s, high and tight haircut grown out about 3 weeks past regulation, which told her something about how long he'd been deployed or away or wherever he'd come from. 2 field dressings on the left thigh, ABD pad packed against the abdomen with fresh blood tracking through it. His eyes were open and moving, which was a good sign. His color was poor. She leaned in, put her hand on his wrist, checking pulse while her eyes ran the visible injury map. "Sir, I'm Nurse Hayes. I've got you. Can you tell me your pain level?" He looked at her. Not at her face exactly. At her. The kind of look that wasn't registering pain level, but registering something else. Something that had nothing to do with his injuries. And then something moved across his expression that she didn't immediately understand. "Hayes," he said. His voice was rough, dried out, the voice of someone who had been running on adrenaline for too long. "Olivia Hayes." She didn't stop working. She was already calling out vitals to the tech behind her, already assessing the abdomen, already forming a mental image of what they might find in CT. "That's right. I've got you. What's your name?" "Sergeant Marcus Webb," he said. "10th Special Forces Group." He paused, still watching her with that look she couldn't quite categorize. "You were with the 161st. She stopped for exactly 1 second, not long enough for anyone watching to be certain they'd seen it. 160th SOAR, he said, quieter now. "You were the medic on the Konar extraction. March 2019. The trauma bay had other people in it. Dana at the monitor, a tech, a respiratory therapist setting up, 2 of the military personnel who'd come in with him now standing at the edges of the room. Olivia kept her hands moving. She kept her voice professional and even and clear. "We're going to take good care of you, Sergeant. I need you to stay still while we get your pressure up." But Webb hadn't looked away from her. "You kept Donahue alive for 6 hours, he said. 6 hours in that valley. No medevac, no extraction, artillery hitting 300 meters north. His hand, the one with the IV already in it from the field medic, came up slightly, not grabbing her, just pointing. "I was in the second bird. I saw you when they finally got us out." One of the military personnel at the edge of the room, a woman, maybe early 40s, short hair, a bearing that said officer, the way some people's posture just said position, had gone very still. She was looking at Olivia with an expression that had started as professional assessment and was becoming something considerably more complicated. "Clear," Olivia called out, moving the team into CT prep. "Let's move. Dana, get Kapoor on the line. Tell him I want him here in person, not on the phone." The gurney moved, and behind it the military officer was already reaching for her radio. Outside, in the corridor that connected the main lobby to the ER, Officer Derek Vaughn was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, watching the organized chaos of the trauma response through the small window in the double doors. He had that look he sometimes got, the spectator's look, the look of someone watching a situation and calculating how much of it he could still control. He didn't know yet what Sergeant Marcus Webb had just said. He didn't know yet what the woman with the radio was doing. He wouldn't know for another 47 minutes, and by then, it would already be too late. The woman with the radio was Major Carla Mossbridge, and she had not used that radio yet. She stood at the edge of the trauma bay corridor, watching Olivia through the window and the doors, and she was doing the thing that good officers do when something doesn't line up with what they expected. She was being very quiet and very still and processing information before she acted on it. Webb was inside. She could hear his voice occasionally through the door, that particular quality of a man maintaining communication through pain because it was habit at this point, because you trained it in until silence became the aberration. The medical staff was moving efficiently. The nurse, Hayes, was the axis of it, the one everyone else was oriented toward, which Mossbridge had noticed within 30 seconds of arriving. She had also noticed Vaughn. Hard not to. He had that specific posture she'd learned to identify over years of working in environments where multiple agencies shared space, the posture of a man who believed his jurisdiction extended further than it actually did, who used proximity as authority. He'd been watching the trauma bay response with his arms crossed and his jaw set, and twice he'd glanced down the corridor toward the supply closet area with the look of someone who hadn't finished something. Mossbridge had served 14 years. She had a particular sensitivity to men who hadn't finished something. She stepped back from the window and made her call. Inside the trauma bay, Olivia was not thinking about Vaughn. She did not have the bandwidth for Vaughn right now. She had a 38-year-old male with a through-and-through GSW to the left thigh. Clean entry, clean exit. Missed the femoral by what the field medic's notes described as approximately 4 centimeters, which was 4 centimeters of luck that Webb himself probably hadn't processed yet. And a more complicated situation in the abdomen where the round had fragmented slightly, and Dr. Kapoor was going to have opinions about the fragment distribution as soon as he got here. Webb's pressure had come up to 94/60 on 2 large-bore IVs and a liter of saline, which was better but not good enough. His oxygen sat was holding at 96%. He was alert, oriented, and communicating, which remained in the positive column. "Squeeze this," Olivia told him, pressing a rolled washcloth into his right hand. Not for clinical reasons, to give him something to do with the hand that kept wanting to reach for things. Combat patients were like that. The body kept trying to act when the action was over. "You didn't answer me," Webb said. "I need you to focus on your breathing right now, Sergeant." "I'm focused. You didn't answer." She checked his thigh dressing. The bleeding was controlled. Field medic had done solid work. She'd seen worse tourniquet placements from people with 3 times the training. "What do you need me to answer? Were you 161st, or did I mix you up with somebody else?" She pulled the supply cart closer, kept her hands busy. "You didn't mix me up." Webb was quiet for a moment, then, "Donahue's still alive, got out of the service 2 years ago, has a kid now, a girl." Olivia nodded once, not looking at him. She was looking at the monitor. She was looking at the dressing. She was looking at her hands, which were doing their job the way they always did their job, with a thoroughness that didn't leave room for much else. "Good," she said. "That's good." Dana appeared at her elbow. "Kapoor's 4 minutes out. You want imaging now or you want to wait for him?" "Now. I want the fragment map before he walks in so we're not wasting his time." She looked at Dana over the cart. "And I need someone to pull my schedule log for the last 2 hours. The supply closet on East Corridor, timestamp everything." Dana's expression shifted slightly. She'd been a charge nurse long enough to understand what that request meant without being told. "Vaughn?" "Just pull it." Dana left. Olivia looked back at Webb, who was watching her with eyes that had the particular quality of someone who had seen a lot and was currently adding to the catalog. "You've been here 14 months, he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Nobody knows." She checked his pupils, even reactive. "Nobody needed to know." "Hayes." His voice changed, not softer exactly, but more direct. The change in register that came when someone was setting pleasantries aside. "There's a guy outside that door who's had eyes on you since we came in. He's not medical." "I know. He's got a problem with you." "I know that too." Webb said nothing for a moment. His hand was working the washcloth, steady compressions. "You handling it?" She met his eyes. "I'm handling my patient first." That seemed to satisfy him. He leaned back, some of the tension going out of his shoulders, and let her work. 40 feet away, in the corridor, Vaughn had decided he wasn't satisfied. He'd watched the military personnel come in, counted 3 of them, assessed their gear, assessed their bearing, arrived at the conclusion that this was a logistics issue someone in administration should be dealing with and not something that changed anything about the situation with the nurse. The nurse had walked out of his conversation. She had declined to finish what he'd started. That was its own kind of problem, the kind that built up over time if you let it, so you didn't let it. He found Bryce in the corridor. "I need the charge nurse's direct line." Bryce pulled out his phone. He had the look he always had when Vaughn was working up to something, the look of someone watching a car move toward a wall and being too far away to do anything useful. "What for?" "The Hayes situation. I need it documented before she gets a chance to put her version in first." "Derek," Bryce stopped, started again. "The military transport thing is probably going to tie everyone up for a while. Maybe this is a wait until morning situation." Vaughn looked at him. "Give me the number, Bryce." Bryce gave him the number. Vaughn stepped into an alcove off the main corridor and made the call. It connected on the 4th ring to a groggy, irritated Dana Reyes, who said immediately, "I'm in the middle of a trauma intake. Who is this?" "Officer Vaughn, hospital security. I need to document a formal conduct concern regarding one of your nurses." Olivia Hayes. A beat of silence. Then, with a quality that was not quite patience, "You're calling me right now." "It's time sensitive. Officer Vaughn, I have a critical patient and I will call you back." Dana hung up. Vaughn stared at his phone for a moment. He scrolled to the direct line for the overnight administrator on call. A man named Gerald Fitch, who picked up complaints like other people collected grievances, which made him useful. Vaughn called him. Fitch answered on the second ring, which was characteristic. The man kept his phone on loud and slept light, and treated every call after midnight like it might be the one that finally mattered. "Fitch, it's Vaughn down in the ER. I've got a conduct situation with a nurse that I need you to log officially, tonight, before her shift ends." There was a pause, the sound of Fitch sitting up, a lamp clicking on somewhere. "What's the situation?" "Non-compliance, disrespect toward an officer, potential misappropriation of hospital supplies. I initiated a standard inquiry, and she refused to cooperate, became verbally aggressive." "Olivia Hayes?" Fitch said. Vaughn paused. "You know her?" "She's filed 0 complaints in 14 months, 0 incidents, and she just worked 40 minutes on a critical trauma. I know my staff, Derek." "That's fine, but what I'm telling you is, what you're telling me is you had a problem with a nurse at 2 in the morning and you want it on record before she can file first." Fitch's voice was flat. "I'm going to need documentation. Photos, witness statements, the full incident report. Bring it to me by 6 a.m. and I'll log it." "I need it logged now." "6 a.m., Derek." Fitch hung up. Vaughn came out of the alcove. His jaw was set, and there was a specific energy about him that Bryce recognized as the preliminary stage of a decision that was going to be bad. "I'm going to go talk to her supervisor in person," Vaughn said. "The trauma's still active, man. Then I'll wait outside the bay until it's not." He walked toward the ER. What he walked into was not what he expected. The corridor outside Trauma Bay 2 was no longer empty. Major Carla Mossbridge was standing there with a staff sergeant named Ruiz, and they were not alone. Someone had come from administration. A woman named Patricia Holt, who was the night shift patient relations manager, and who had the look of someone who had received a phone call that made her get dressed very fast. 2 of the ER nurses were in the corridor, one of them holding a tablet, and Dr. Rajan Kapoor had arrived and was standing with his arms crossed looking at something on the tablet that the nurse was showing him. Vaughn read the room and decided it didn't apply to him. He moved toward the bay doors. Mossbridge stepped into his path. Not aggressively, just into his path. "Are you Officer Vaughn?" He stopped, looked at her insignia, did the calculation. "Major, yes. I was told you had an interaction earlier tonight with one of the ER nurses." "That's correct. An ongoing conduct matter." "Where did that interaction take place?" "The East Corridor Supply Area and the security office." "And at any point during that interaction," Mossbridge's voice was even, precise, the kind of voice that had been trained to conduct interviews in situations where imprecision had consequences, "did you place your hand on your service weapon in a manner that was not related to an active threat?" The corridor went quieter. Not silent. The hospital was never silent. But the specific noise level of people who were working and moving changed slightly. A subtle shift in the direction of stillness. Vaughn's expression didn't change. That was the tell, actually, the careful non-change of it. "I placed my hand on my holster in the course of a standard compliance interaction." "Was the nurse refusing to comply?" "She was being uncooperative." "Was she refusing to comply?" Mossbridge repeated. Same cadence, same volume. "I used a standard de-escalation posture." Kapoor had lowered the tablet. He was watching Vaughn with the expression of a surgeon watching a poorly closed wound. Patricia Holt was writing something on her phone. "Major," Vaughn said, pivoting, finding a new angle, "I understand you're here for the patient, and I respect that. But what's happening here is a separate matter, a hospital conduct issue, and it's going to be processed through the security camera in the supply closet area," Mossbridge said, "and the one in your office. Those are hospital cameras?" "Yes." "So the footage belongs to the hospital." A pause. "Yes." Mossbridge looked at Patricia Holt. Holt was already moving. Inside the trauma bay, Olivia didn't know about the conversation in the corridor. She was watching the CT monitor with Kapoor, who had arrived 6 minutes ago and had been uncharacteristically quiet since he reviewed the imaging. Kapoor was 51, had trained at Johns Hopkins, and had the professional demeanor of someone who communicated primarily in the language of problems and solutions with the emotional content stripped out. He was not a warm man, but he was a precise one, and Olivia respected precise. Fragment cluster is anterior, Kapoor said, pointing. Far enough from the bowel margin that I'm not in a rush, but I want him in the OR inside the hour. Agreed. His pressure better? 106/72 on the last check. Kapoor straightened. He looked at Webb, then at Olivia, with the slight pause of a man who had something else to say, and was deciding whether to say it. Hayes, there are people in my corridor having a conversation that I believe concerns you. She kept her eyes on the monitor. I know. Do you want to be part of it? I want to finish this intake. Kapoor looked at her for another moment. Then he nodded, the small nod of someone who had decided to let competence speak for itself, and went to scrub in. Webb was watching her again. He'd caught the exchange. What's going on out there? Nothing you need to worry about tonight. Hayes. She looked at him. If Mossbridge is involved, he said slowly, it's not nothing. She didn't answer that directly. She checked his IV lines, his pressure cuff, the positioning of his arm. Then she said, quietly enough that only he could hear it, I handled worse than a bad cop in a hospital corridor, Sergeant. Don't worry about me. Webb was quiet. Then, with something that might have been the edge of a smile under everything else. Yeah, I know you did. She stepped back and called for the transport team. Webb needed to be upstairs. The OR was waiting, Kapoor was waiting, and her job in this bay was almost finished. What was not finished was everything in the corridor. Vaughn had been asked to wait. He had not been told why specifically, which was deliberate on Mossbridge's part. She'd spent enough time in rooms with men like this to know that specificity was leverage you didn't give away early. He was standing near the nurse's station with Bryce at his shoulder and the expression of a man who was recalibrating. Patricia Holt came back from the security monitoring room at 3:24 a.m. She walked directly to Mossbridge, said something quiet that Vaughn couldn't hear, and handed her a printed sheet with 2 screenshots attached. Mossbridge looked at it. Her expression didn't change, which was its own kind of information. She handed it to Kapoor, who had reappeared from the scrub area for reasons that were not surgical. He looked at it. He handed it to Dana Reyes, who had also reappeared, who looked at it and then looked at Vaughn with the particular expression of a charge nurse who has just had a very long night get considerably longer. Vaughn said, "What is that?" Nobody answered him immediately. That was unusual. People answered him. That was generally how it went. Mossbridge looked up from the sheet. "Officer Vaughn, I'd like to ask you to step into the administrator's office." "What is that paperwork?" "The administrator's office," she said again, and this time there was something in her voice that had not been there before. A very thin, very precise edge that said, "This is still the easy version of this conversation, but I will not offer the easy version indefinitely." Bryce put a hand on Vaughn's arm. Vaughn shook it off. He was looking at the screenshots, trying to read them from where he was standing, but the angle was wrong and Dana had already turned the sheet over. "For what purpose?" Vaughn said. "I haven't done anything." "For the purpose of a preliminary inquiry," Mossbridge said, "which you can participate in cooperatively or not, but which is going to happen regardless." The charge nurse's station was not a private space. 2 nurses, a patient tech, and an orderly who'd been moving a supply cart slowly for the last 4 minutes were all in earshot. Vaughn could feel that. He was good at reading rooms usually, and what this room was reading was not in his favor. "Fine," he said. "Let's go." They moved down the corridor toward the administrator's office, and as they passed the double doors to the ER bay area, Vaughn glanced through the window. The trauma bay was quieter now. Webb was being prepped for transport to the OR, the main activity winding down. But Olivia Hayes was standing at the nurse's station just inside the doors, writing in a chart, and she looked up at exactly the wrong moment, or the right moment, depending on perspective. Their eyes met through the glass. She didn't smile. She didn't look away. She just held his gaze for 3 full seconds with the stillness that he'd been reading as indifferent since the beginning of the night, and that he was starting, somewhere under the recalibration, to understand was something else entirely. Then she looked back down at her chart. In the administrator's office, which was a room with a desk, 3 chairs, and a framed mission statement that nobody had ever read, Mossbridge closed the door and sat down across from Vaughn, with the printed sheet face down on the desk between them. Holt sat to the side, a notepad open. Bryce remained standing near the door. "We're going to talk about tonight's events in sequence," Mossbridge said, "starting from when you first approached Nurse Hayes." "I need to understand what authority you have here," Vaughn said. "You're military. This is a civilian hospital." "Sergeant Webb is my responsibility," Mossbridge said. "His transport here, his care team, and any incidents that occurred in connection with his arrival fall within the scope of my inquiry. Nurse Hayes is his care team." "She wasn't his care team when I approached her. But she is now, and given what Sergeant Webb reported to me about the interaction you had with her," Mossbridge paused, very deliberately, "I have an interest in understanding the full picture." "Webb talked to you about—" Vaughn stopped. He was recalibrating again, faster this time. "He's been in surgery prep. When did he—" "When would you like to start?" Mossbridge said. "From the supply corridor?" Vaughn looked at her. He looked at Holt with her notepad. He looked at the sheet face down on the desk, the one with the screenshots, the one he still couldn't read. The hospital cameras. He knew the angles on those cameras because he worked this building 3 nights a week. He knew what they covered, and he knew what they didn't. He thought he knew. He pulled his chair forward and said, "I'm going to call my union rep before this conversation goes further." Mossbridge looked at him steadily. "That's your right." She didn't move. She didn't close her notepad. She just sat there, hands folded, waiting, with the patience of someone who had nowhere else to be and no deadline that mattered. Vaughn pulled out his phone, and across the hospital, in the scrub room outside OR3, Kapoor paused before pushing through the door and said to the circulating nurse who was holding it open, "Make sure the East Corridor footage is formally logged by hospital security before 6 a.m. under my authorization. All of it. Don't let anyone pull it without my direct sign-off." The nurse said she would. Kapoor went in to operate. Down in the ER, Olivia finished her chart entry, clipped the pen to the chart cover, and stood for a moment at the nurse's station. The ER was cycling into its 3 a.m. rhythm. Slower, but never actually slow. There was a teenager in Bay 4 with a possible appendicitis waiting on labs. A man in his 60s in Bay 6 with chest pain that was probably musculoskeletal and probably not, but you didn't guess on those. Work to do. Dana appeared at her elbow. "You okay?" Olivia considered the question with the practical honesty of someone who didn't have time to perform emotions she wasn't actually feeling. "I'm fine." They're in Fitch's office. Mossbridge, Holt, and Vaughn. "I know." "Holt asked me to make a formal statement about the supply log. I pulled the timestamps you asked for. They're in the system." Dana paused. "Olivia, the screenshots from the office camera, I know. You knew about the angle." She didn't answer. "You knew when you stood there," Dana said, quieter now. "You knew the camera in the security office had a clear shot of the holster." Olivia looked down the corridor toward the bay where Webb's gurney had been, empty now, the equipment reset for the next patient. "Go make your statement," she said. "Tell them exactly what happened." Dana looked at her for a long moment, the look of a woman who had worked nights long enough to know that the things people didn't say were often more important than the things they did. Then she nodded and left. Olivia picked up the next chart. At 3:51 a.m., the door to the administrator's office opened. Vaughn came out first, followed by his union rep, a man who had arrived at 3:40 looking like he'd dressed in a car, followed by Mossbridge, who was holding the printed sheet and no longer had it face down. Vaughn walked down the main corridor with his rep, their voices low and fast. Something was wrong with his walk. Not dramatically. He wasn't limping, he wasn't shaking, but there was something off in the way he was moving that hadn't been there at 2 a.m. when he'd been standing over a nurse in a supply corridor with a hand on his holster. Mossbridge watched him go. Then she turned and looked toward the ER doors. Olivia was visible through the window, moving between bays. Mossbridge watched her for a moment. The efficiency of it, the absence of wasted motion. The way the rest of the ER staff oriented to her without making a production of it. The way she'd been in the trauma bay, not performing competence, just having it, which was a different thing entirely. Mossbridge had made 3 calls since arriving at Crestwood. 1 to her commanding officer, 1 to the JAG office, 1 to a number she didn't call often but that she'd had memorized for 6 years. Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. The text was 4 words. On my way. Which floor? She typed back, ER, come to me. She put her phone in her pocket and walked toward the ER doors. Vaughn's union rep was still talking to him at the end of the corridor, low and fast, with the particular energy of someone doing damage assessment on a structure that was already compromised, trying to figure out which walls were still load-bearing. Vaughn wasn't quite listening. He was looking at the ER window, at the nurse inside. His rep said his name. Vaughn finally looked at him. Derek, the rep said, listen to me carefully. The footage, I know what the footage shows. Then you know that as of right now, we are in a very different conversation than we were an hour ago. The rep lowered his voice further. I need you to not go back in that ER. Vaughn said nothing. I need you to go sit in the security office, not make any additional statements, and wait for me to make some calls. The rep put a hand on his arm. Derek, do you understand what I'm telling you? Vaughn looked at the ER window one more time. Then he looked away. Yeah, he said. I understand. But his phone was already in his hand, and inside the ER, Olivia Hayes looked up from her chart. Not because she'd heard anything, but because the back of her neck had the specific feeling it got sometimes. The feeling she'd learned not to ignore in places where ignoring it had consequences. And looked through the window into the corridor. Vaughn was gone. His union rep was gone. And coming through the main entrance at the far end of the hall, moving with the unhurried certainty of someone who knew exactly where they were going, was a man in civilian clothes whose face she recognized, whose face she had not seen in 4 years, whose presence here, tonight, at 4 a.m. in a Denver hospital ER, meant that whatever had started in a supply corridor 2 hours ago had just become something considerably larger than a complaint about a nurse. His name was Colonel David Nraft, and the last time Olivia had seen him, she had been standing in a forward operating base in eastern Afghanistan with blood on her hands that wasn't hers, and a satellite phone pressed to her ear while 2 helicopters burned on the ridge above them. He was 53 now. He looked it in some ways and not in others. The civilian clothes, dark jacket, gray shirt, no tie, couldn't quite erase the posture, the way his weight sat on his feet, the way his eyes moved through the room before the rest of him committed to entering it. He'd put on maybe 10 pounds since the last time she'd seen him, lost some of the hair. He was still the most composed person in any room he walked into, and he walked into this one like he already knew the floor plan. He saw Mossbridge first, gave her a nod that conveyed everything and nothing simultaneously. Then his eyes found Olivia through the bay window, and he stopped moving for exactly 1 second. She turned back to her chart. He came through the ER doors. Dana, at the nurse's station, looked up and did the specific calculation that charge nurses do when an unknown quantity enters their clinical space. Threat assessment. Not in the police sense, but in the what is this going to cost me sense. And landed somewhere between uncertain and alert. Nraft didn't go to the nurse's station. He walked to the bay window where Olivia was working and stood outside it, not trying to come in, not calling out to her, just waiting. She finished what she was writing. Then she stepped out of the bay. They stood in the corridor and looked at each other for a moment. The kind of moment that happens between people who have a history that can't be summarized and both of them know it. Colonel, she said, you're not going to call me David even now. Probably not. He looked at her the way she'd seen him look at maps. Systematic, reading for information, not sentiment. Mossbridge called me at 3:40. I figured. She told me what happened. Then you know as much as I do. I know what she knows, Nraft said, which is the military piece of it. I'm here for a different reason. He paused. How much of tonight is going to require damage control? It was a practical question, not a dismissive one, and she answered it practically. That depends on what's on the security footage and what they decide to do with it. Mossbridge says it's clear. Then damage control is for Vaughn, not for me. Nraft held her gaze. You've been here 14 months. I have. Nobody knew. Nobody needed to. He made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. You sound like you've been practicing that. Someone said it to me earlier tonight. I'm workshopping it. The tension between them was not hostility. It was something more complicated. The specific weight of people who had been through something together and then gone in opposite directions and were now standing in the same corridor trying to recalibrate what they were to each other now, at 4 in the morning, in a hospital in Denver. I'm not here officially, Nraft said. Mossbridge is the official presence. I'm here because she called me and I owed her a favor and because… He stopped. Started differently. Because when she described the nurse, I knew who it was. Olivia said nothing. You went through the proper discharge process, he said. Clean record. Everything above board. I'm not here to complicate that. Then what are you here to do? He looked down the corridor toward the administrator's office. Make sure the people who should understand the scope of tonight's situation understand it, so that what happened to you doesn't get buried under whatever Vaughn's union rep is trying to construct right now. She considered that for a moment. And if I'd rather handle it myself? Then you'll handle it yourself, Nraft said, and I'll get a coffee somewhere and fly home in the morning. But I drove 40 minutes from my hotel at 4 a.m., so I'd appreciate knowing before I commit to the coffee. She almost smiled, almost. Let me finish my shift. When does it end? 7. He nodded. I'll be here. He moved to a chair in the waiting area. Not the administrator's office, not the nurse's station, just a chair, the way anyone waiting on someone would sit. And he sat down and took out his phone and gave every appearance of a man reading something unimportant. Olivia went back to work. The teenager in Bay 4 had appendicitis, confirmed. She got Dr. Navarro on the phone, relayed the labs, flagged it for surgery consult. The 60-year-old with chest pain had a troponin that came back borderline elevated, which changed the calculus entirely. She called cardiology, rechecked his vitals, started the telemetry monitor, and explained to him in the careful, honest way she did these things that they were going to watch him closely, and that the word borderline didn't mean fine. It meant they needed more information. He asked her if he was having a heart attack. She said, "We're going to figure out exactly what's happening and make sure you get the right care. I need you to lie still and not argue with the monitor." He said, "I hate hospitals." "Most people do," she said. "You're still in the right place." She moved through the rest of the Bay assessments with the systematic efficiency that had always been her default mode, the part of her that went quiet and clear when there was work to do. This was the part nobody outside medicine understood well. That you could have a situation unraveling in the corridor, a security officer somewhere in the building composing a version of events that would try to make you smaller, a colonel sitting in your waiting room, a patient upstairs on the table, a past you'd spent 14 months not discussing, and still be fully present for a scared 60-year-old man with a borderline troponin, because that was the job, and the job didn't stop for any of it. At 4:47 a.m., Dana came to find her. She was between bays reviewing a medication order on a tablet, and Dana's face told her something had shifted before Dana said a word. "The footage," Dana said. "What about it?" Holt reviewed the full sequence. Both cameras. Dana kept her voice low. East Corridor camera has the initial interaction, the supply closet angle, and then the security office camera. She stopped. "Dana?" "The holster." Dana's jaw tightened. "He draws it, Olivia. Partially. It's on camera. About 2/3 out of the holster and then back in, and it's clear. It's not ambiguous footage." The corridor was quiet for a moment. "Who has the footage?" Olivia said. "Holt. Kapoor authorized the lockdown on it. Nobody can pull it without his sign-off." Dana looked at her carefully. "Mossbridge has seen it. The colonel in the waiting room, I'm assuming he knows. Holt's legal team is being called." "What about Vaughn?" "His rep knows it exists. They haven't seen the full sequence yet." Dana paused. "Olivia, drawing a weapon on a nurse in a hospital corridor at 2 in the morning is… I know what it is. Do you want to give a formal statement now, or after my shift?" "Olivia, after my shift, Dana." She looked at her. "I'm not leaving early. I have patients." Dana looked at her for a long moment, The look of a woman who had spent years working nights and had developed a reliable intuition about which battles to push and which to set down. She set this one down. "Okay," she said. "Okay, but I'm staying over until you're done. Don't argue with me on that." "I wasn't going to." Dana left. Olivia stood in the corridor for a moment, the tablet in her hand, the medication order still on the screen, a partial draw. She had felt the shift in the room, in the air, in the specific quality of the silence that had settled between them in those seconds, and she had not known with certainty, what he was going to do. She'd made an assessment. She'd made a call. She'd been in situations where the assessment was wrong. She looked at the medication order, approved it, moved to the next bay. By 5:15 a.m., the administrator's office had become a different kind of room. Gerald Fitch had been called back in from home. He arrived looking like a man who understood, somewhere in his body, if not yet in his mind, that the shape of his morning had changed. He was 58, had been hospital administrator at Crestwood for 9 years, and had the political instincts of someone who had survived 9 years in hospital administration by understanding very quickly whose side of a situation carried more weight. He sat down, looked at the screenshots Holt put in front of him, and went very still. Major Mossbridge sat across from him. She had the original footage report, the timestamps, the sequence breakdown that Holt's team had generated in the last hour. She also had, on the table in front of her, a document that she'd produced from her jacket pocket and placed there without commentary, which Fitch kept glancing at. "What is that?" he said, indicating the document. "Sergeant Webb's service record," Mossbridge said. "The relevant portions." Fitch looked at it. He looked at the footage stills. He said, carefully, "What is Nurse Hayes' connection to the military?" "She's a former combat medic, honorably discharged, served with an aviation unit. I'm not going to go further than that in this room, for just under 8 years. Multiple deployments, decorated service." Fitch took that in. "And her records here are her own business," Mossbridge said. "She left the service. She became a nurse. She doesn't owe anyone her history." A pause. "What she is owed is to not have a weapon drawn on her while she's stocking supplies in the hospital where she works." Fitch said nothing. "Mr. Fitch," Mossbridge continued, "I want to be clear about what I'm here for. I'm not here to conduct a police investigation. I'm not here to make decisions about Officer Vaughn's employment. I'm here because one of my soldiers recognized a former colleague under duress and reported it to me, and what I found when I arrived was footage of a police officer partially drawing his service weapon on a civilian medical professional in a non-threatening situation inside a hospital at 2 a.m. She let that sit for a moment. "The question of what happens next is above my pay grade, but I will be submitting a full report to my commanding officer, and that report is going to include everything that happened tonight. I want you to have that information before decisions get made." Fitch looked at Holt. Holt looked at her notepad. "Where's Officer Vaughn now?" Fitch said. "Security office," Holt said. "With his union rep." "And his partner? Bryce?" "Also security office." Fitch put both hands flat on the desk. He had the look of a man taking inventory. "I need legal on the phone." "They're already on hold," Holt said. He looked at her. Then he looked at the footage stills one more time. "Get them off hold," he said. Down in the security office, Vaughn's union rep, his name was Pete Calder, and he'd been doing this for 11 years, had been on his phone for the better part of 40 minutes. He'd made 4 calls. He'd received 7. His expression had undergone a gradual compression over those 40 minutes, the way a face does when incoming information is consistently worse than what you expected. Vaughn was sitting in the chair he usually sat in when he worked this building, and the familiarity of the chair was doing something strange. It was making the situation feel more unreal, not less. He'd sat in this chair 100 times. He'd signed in at this desk, eaten lunch at this desk, processed incident forms at this desk, and now he was sitting here while his union rep paced a 4-foot track in front of him, and the word footage kept coming up in every conversation Calder was having. Bryce was somewhere in the building. He'd left 20 minutes ago saying he needed coffee and hadn't come back, which told Vaughn something about where Bryce thought this was going. "Talk to me," Vaughn said. Calder stopped pacing. "The footage from the security office camera has a clear view of the holster." Vaughn kept his face neutral. I didn't draw my weapon. Pete. Vaughn's voice was flat. I didn't draw my weapon. Calder looked at him with the expression of a man who needed, professionally, for that statement to be true and was not yet certain it was. Define partially. A silence. The clip, Vaughn said. I may have... He stopped. It was a retention posture. It was not a draw. The footage is going to show what it shows, Calder said, and the hospital's legal team is already on the phone, which means the framing of what it shows is going to be done by people who don't work for us. He sat down across from Vaughn and lowered his voice. Derek, I need to know right now, before we go any further, whether there is anything else on that footage, either camera, that I need to know about. Vaughn was quiet. Derek. She was non-compliant, Vaughn said. She was resistant from the first moment. I had a complaint? Who filed the complaint? A pause. Derek. Calder's voice had gone very flat. Who filed the complaint? The silence this time was different. It had a specific texture. Calder put his phone face down on the desk. Tell me you didn't call in your own complaint. I observed behavior that... Tell me you didn't call in your own complaint to create a paper trail before you approached her. Vaughn said nothing. Calder pressed both hands to his face for a moment, in the gesture of a man doing rapid, unwelcome arithmetic. Then he dropped his hands and looked at the ceiling. Okay, he said. Okay. He picked his phone back up. Don't say anything else to anyone. Not to administration, not to the military people, not to the nurse's supervisor, nothing. I have rights in this. You have the right to remain silent, and I am begging you to use it. Calder stood up. I need to make a call. He went into the hallway. Vaughn sat alone in the security office, in the chair that was his chair, in the building he'd worked 3 nights a week, and the only sound was the hum of the monitors on the wall showing the hospital camera feeds. He looked at the feeds. East Corridor, supply closet area, the bay entrance, the nurse's station, bay window. And there she was, Hayes, moving between patients, chart in hand, doing exactly what she'd been doing when he'd first seen her tonight, like nothing had changed, like the last 3 hours were just a thing that had happened, and she had simply filed it away and continued. He had a specific feeling watching her. He didn't have good language for it. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was more like the sensation of having pushed something that turned out to be weight-bearing. At 6:20 a.m., the shift change began arriving. The morning nurses came in, took their handoffs, exchanged the low-volume communication of people who have done this transition 1,000 times. The ER began its slow early morning breath. Not slower in terms of patience, but different, the specific quality of the hour between night and true morning when the city was neither fully asleep nor awake. Olivia gave her handoffs, clean, systematic, nothing missed. The teenager with appendicitis was in pre-op. The chest pain patient was stable and going to cardiology in the morning. She walked through every patient she'd touched that night with the incoming nurse, a woman named Priya who'd been working at Crestwood for 3 years and who had the particular quality of someone who listened rather than waiting to talk. Good night? Priya asked, which was shorthand for anything I need to know beyond the clinical. Olivia considered it. Eventful. Priya nodded once, in the way of someone who understood that eventful at this hospital meant a range of things and could be asked about and could also be left alone. She left it alone. Olivia collected her bag from the locker room, changed out of her scrubs, stood in front of the mirror for a moment, not performing anything, just existing for 10 seconds without anyone needing anything from her. She looked tired. She was tired. That was accurate. She washed her face, dried it, went back out. Raft was still in the waiting room. He'd gotten coffee from somewhere. A paper cup, probably the machine in the lobby. And he looked up when she came through the doors. Mossbridge was at the nurse's station. She straightened when she saw Olivia. We need about 30 minutes, Mossbridge said. Formal statement. Holt will be there. Hospital Legal is sending someone, and there'll be an officer from the Denver PD Internal Affairs. They were called in at 5:30. Internal Affairs. Olivia absorbed that. When? Now, if you're willing, or we can schedule for... Now, Olivia said. Let's do it now. The room they used was the hospital's main conference room on the second floor because the administrator's office had become saturated with various ongoing conversations, and nobody wanted to do this in the ER. It was a room with a long table, 8 chairs, a whiteboard with something still written on it from a meeting 2 days ago about parking allocation. Ordinary. The complete mundanity of it was almost funny. Holt was there, the hospital's legal representative, a woman named Sandra Bow who looked like she'd dressed for court and had the expression to match. A detective named Marcus Alvarez from Denver PD Internal Affairs, who was compact, late 40s, and had the energy of someone who had been doing this job long enough that nothing surprised him, but everything got his full attention. Mossbridge. Enraft, who sat against the wall rather than at the table, indicating his presence was informational rather than official. Olivia sat down. She folded her hands on the table. "Start wherever makes sense," Alvarez said. She started at the supply closet. She went through it the way she'd been trained to document anything, linearly, specifically, without editorializing. The initial contact, the badge request, the claim about a complaint, the move to the security office, the sequence of questions, the threat about her job, the moment his hand went to the holster. She didn't describe her emotional state. She described what she observed, what was said, what occurred, in sequence. Alvarez listened without interrupting. He took notes, actual handwritten notes, which she noted. Boo also took notes. Holt had a recorder running with Olivia's permission. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. "You said he placed his hand on his holster," Alvarez said. "Can you describe that in more detail?" He put his right hand on the grip of his service weapon. The retention strap was released. The weapon came partially out of the holster, I estimated approximately 40%, and then he resecured it. "How confident are you in that assessment?" "Very." Alvarez looked at her for a moment. "You have training relevant to assessing that kind of movement?" She held his gaze. "Yes." He nodded, made a note. "What did you do in response to that action?" "I told him to take his hand off his holster." "And his response?" "He asked if I wanted to reconsider my tone." The room was quiet again. Bow, the legal representative, said without looking up from her notepad, "And then the trauma call came in." "Yes, and he let you leave." "He stepped back. I walked out." Alvarez clicked his pen once, a small, precise motion. "Ms. Hayes, given your background—" He paused, in the way of someone who had been briefed on something and was being careful about what he said and how. "Given your professional experience, would you characterize Officer Vaughn's behavior as posing an actual physical threat or as an intimidation tactic?" It was a careful question, and she took a moment with it. "Both," she said. "They're not mutually exclusive." Nraft, from against the wall, didn't move or speak, but she could feel the quality of his attention. "You're saying the threat was real," Alvarez said. "I'm saying a partially drawn service weapon in a non-threatening situation directed at a person who posed no physical risk is a real thing regardless of what he intended by it. Intent is for courts. What I'm describing is what occurred." Alvarez wrote something. He underlined something. He looked up. "One more question, and you can decline to answer. Why didn't you call it in yourself?" "Tonight, after you left the security office." She'd known the question was coming. She'd thought about it, somewhere between the appendicitis consult and the cardiology call, in the margins of the night where the brain keeps working on things you haven't consciously assigned it. "I had patience," she said. "That's not the only reason." She looked at him. "No," she said. "It's not." "Ms. Hayes, because I've seen what happens when it's a nurse's word against a cop's word," she said. "And I needed something other than my word." The room absorbed that. Alvarez nodded, the nod of a man receiving information he'd expected but needed to hear, said clearly, "The footage is that something." "Yes." He closed his notepad. He looked at Bow, at Holt, and then at Mossbridge, who had been completely still for the entire statement. "I think we have what we need for the preliminary. I'll need additional documentation from the hospital." Boo nodded. "And we'll schedule a follow-up in the next 48 hours. He stood. Boo stood. Olivia stayed seated for a moment. Not for any particular reason, just because the chair was available and she hadn't sat down for more than 6 minutes at a stretch since 11 p.m. the night before. Mossbridge stayed in the room after the others filtered out. She sat at the table, 2 chairs down from Olivia, and said, "Sergeant Webb is out of surgery. Dr. Kapoor says the fragment removal went well. No bowel involvement." "Good. He's going to recover fully." A pause. "He asked if you'd come up when you have time." Olivia looked at the whiteboard, the parking allocation notes. Someone had written Phase 2, TBD in red marker, and underlined it twice, which seemed like the right note for this particular morning. "Tell him I'll come before I leave." He also said, Mossbridge stopped, started differently. "He told me about Konar, what you did there." Olivia said nothing. "He said they all thought the extraction was done, that you stayed on the ground with Donahue when the first bird had to pull out early, that you managed him for 6 hours, Olivia said quietly. "I know how long it was. He says you shouldn't have survived it." "He's not wrong." Mossbridge was quiet for a moment. "Why nursing? After everything, why this?" Olivia considered the question, the honest version of it, not the version you gave when someone wanted a clean answer. "Because out there I saved people to send them back to the same thing," she said. "And in here, most of the time, I save them to send them home." Mossbridge nodded once, slowly. "And because I'm good at it," Olivia added. "That matters too." Nraft appeared in the doorway. He looked at both of them, read whatever was in the room, and said, "Alvarez is requesting Vaughn's duty logs, all of them. Not just tonight." Olivia looked at him. "Apparently tonight wasn't the first complaint," Nraft said. "Alvarez found 2 prior incidents in the system, both resolved informally, both involving female hospital staff. The weight of that landed in the room with a specific kind of gravity." "How far back?" Mossbridge said. 14 months. Nraft met Olivia's eyes. "Which means Vaughn was here when she arrived." Neither of them said what that meant. They didn't need to. Olivia pushed her chair back and stood up. She felt the full weight of the night in her legs, her lower back, the space behind her eyes. Not incapacitating, just present, the body's honest accounting. "I'm going to see Webb," she said. "Then I'm going home." She walked out of the conference room, down the corridor, to the elevator. The elevator was empty. She rode it up to the surgical recovery floor, and the doors opened to the quieter sound of a ward in early morning, the soft register of a floor where people were healing rather than arriving. She found Webb's room at the end of the hall. He was awake. He looked worse than he had in the trauma bay, which was normal. The adrenaline was done. The anesthesia was cycling out. And what remained was the plain fact of 2 wounds in a body that had been through the machine of surgery. His color was better than it had been at 2 a.m., but his eyes were heavy, and his voice, when he spoke, came from a distance. "You came," he said. "I said I would." She checked his IV line out of habit. She wasn't his nurse up here, but the habit was too deep to turn off. Rate was right. Sight looked clean. She let it go. "You look like you haven't slept," Webb said. "I haven't. The thing with the cop is being handled." He watched her. "You okay?" She thought about giving him the easy version. Then she thought about who she was talking to, and what he'd seen, and what she'd seen, and how the easy version had a way of landing badly on people who'd been in real situations. "I will be," she said. He nodded. That seemed to be enough. "Donahue's going to hear about this," he said. "Somehow he always hears about everything." "Tell him I said hi." "You could tell him yourself. He'd want to." "Maybe," she said. "Not tonight." She straightened. She was going to say something about recovery, about following his care team's instructions, about the physical therapy schedule they'd give him before discharge. Because that was what she did. She left people with the next step. But Webb spoke first. "Hayes." His voice had changed slightly, clearer somehow, despite the fatigue. "What you did tonight, not the Konar thing, tonight. The way you held your ground with that cop. The way you just..." He stopped. Not everybody would have stayed standing. She looked at him. I know you know that, he said. I wanted to say it out loud. She was quiet for a moment. Get some sleep, Sergeant, she said. She walked out of the room, down the corridor, and hit the elevator button. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She looked at it. A text from an unknown number. You need to see what they're filing. Before 9 a.m. Bryce. She stared at the screen. The elevator arrived. She stood in the doorway, holding it with one hand, phone in the other. Bryce. Vaughn's partner. The one who had been in the security office and had gone very still and had left for coffee and never come back. She typed back, What are they filing? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, Vaughn's rep reframed the footage. The draw is being logged as a medical intervention. He's claiming you were in distress. Erratic. That he was trying to assess if you needed help. She read it twice. Medical intervention. She looked up at the elevator, which had given up waiting and closed its doors. She was standing alone in the surgical recovery corridor with the quiet of early morning all around her and her phone in her hand. And what she felt was not panic and was not fear and was not even the specific cold clarity of combat assessment. What she felt was something considerably simpler and considerably more precise. She called Nraft. He answered on the first ring. I was about to call you, he said. You've seen it. Alvarez just called me. Yes. Can they make it stick? A pause. Not the pause of uncertainty. The pause of a man being careful about what he said and how. Not if the footage is what Holt says it is. But they're going to try to complicate the interpretation. And if they get to Fitch before Alvarez does, how long do we have? The filing window opens at 9, Nraft said. It's 6:47. She was already moving back toward the elevator. Olivia, Nraft said, and it was the first time tonight he'd used her first name. There's something else. She hit the button. Tell me. The 2 prior complaints Alvarez found, the informal resolutions. What about them? One of them, the second one, logged 8 months ago. The resolution notes include a sign-off from Fitch. The elevator arrived. She stepped in. Fitch knew, she said. Fitch knew, Nraft confirmed, which means when Vaughn called him at 2 a.m. tonight to log the complaint against you, it wasn't just Vaughn protecting himself, she said. The elevator started to descend. No, Nraft said, it wasn't. The elevator hit the ground floor, and Olivia was moving before the doors finished opening. And Nraft was already in the main lobby when she came through, phone down, jacket on, the look of a man who had shifted from information gathering to something more operational. He read her face and didn't bother with preamble. Alvarez needs the footage formally locked before Calder gets to Fitch, he said. If Fitch authorizes a reframe of the incident classification before 9, it complicates the internal affairs filing. Can Fitch do that? He's the administrator on record. He has signatory authority on incident classifications until the board overrides him. Nraft was already walking, which means we have about 2 hours. Where's Mossbridge? On the phone with Jag. She's been on with them since you went upstairs. He pushed through the doors toward the main corridor. There's something else, Alvarez told me. The union rep, Calder. He's already been in contact with the hospital's PR office. Someone tipped him that the military was involved, and he's trying to get ahead of the narrative. The angle they're building is that you had a stress episode, that Vaughn responded appropriately to a nurse exhibiting erratic behavior, and that the military presence tonight is being used to retroactively reframe a routine compliance interaction. Olivia processed that as she walked. Erratic behavior. Combat stress. PTSD. That's the language Calder's team is floating. Nraft's voice was level, but there was something underneath it. Not anger, but the controlled burn of someone who found something deeply tactically offensive. The implication being that your military background is a liability, not an asset, that it explains the behavior Vaughn was responding to. She stopped walking. He stopped 2 steps ahead and turned. They're going to use my service record, she said. They're going to try. She stood in the corridor for a moment, and it wasn't indecision. It was the specific stillness of someone recalibrating, running the new data through the framework and adjusting the approach. Then we need Alvarez to lock the footage classification before Calder gets to anyone with signatory authority. And we need the prior complaints on record, both of them, in the same filing tonight, before the 9 a.m. window. Alvarez is already working the prior complaints. He needs a formal statement connecting Fitch's sign-off to tonight's incident. From who? Nraft looked at her steadily. From you, or from someone Fitch reported to? She thought about it for 3 seconds. Bryce. Nraft waited. Vaughn's partner, she said. He texted me about the reframe. He left the security office at 4 a.m. and didn't come back. He knows something. You think he'll talk? He texted me a warning. That's already talking. She pulled out her phone. I need to call him before Calder figures out he's a loose end. She found Bryce's text, called the number back. It rang 5 times, and she thought it was going to voicemail. And then a voice answered, younger sounding than she expected, tight with something that wasn't quite fear, but was adjacent to it. Hayes. Where are you? Parking structure, level 2. A pause. I wasn't supposed to... Look, I just thought you should know what they were doing. I know. I need you to talk to a detective from Internal Affairs. Silence. Bryce. She kept her voice even, not pressing. You already made a choice when you sent that text. The question is whether you follow it through or you let them use you as a witness for the reframe version. More silence. Then, what do they need from me? Everything you saw tonight, all of it. The complaint Vaughn filed on himself, the security office, what happened in that room. The footage supports it, but your account makes it airtight. A long pause, long enough that she thought he might hang up. Then, okay, yeah, okay. Stay where you are. I'm sending someone to you. She hung up and looked at Nraft, who had caught enough of the conversation to understand. He already had his phone out. I'll call Alvarez. Tell him parking structure, level 2, he needs to move. Nraft made the call. Olivia kept walking. The administrator's office was occupied. She could hear voices through the door. Fitch, and at least one other person she didn't recognize. She didn't try to go in. She went to Holt's office instead, which was 2 doors down, and found Holt at her desk with the footage drive in a sealed evidence bag in front of her, and the expression of a woman who had not slept and was running on the specific fuel of someone who knows the thing in front of them matters. The classification, Olivia said. I know, Holt said. Calder's been trying to reach Fitch. I've been sitting on the internal line. She looked up. Sandra Boo is our legal rep, but she works for the hospital, which means she works for Fitch. If he decides to authorize the reframe, he can't authorize it without the footage, and you have the footage. He can authorize it based on the written incident report. The footage is supporting documentation. It doesn't have to be part of the initial filing if he moves fast. Holt's voice was precise, but strained. The classification gets filed. It becomes the record, and then any challenge to it is a separate process that takes weeks. Who has override authority above Fitch yet? The board chair. Holt paused. But the board doesn't meet until... Does the board chair have an emergency contact protocol? Holt looked at her. Yes. For patient safety incidents. A police officer drawing his weapon on a staff member inside the hospital. Holt was already reaching for her phone. Olivia stepped back and let her work. She stood in the doorway of Holt's office and looked down the corridor toward the administrator's office, where the voices were still audible. The rhythm of a conversation that had the particular cadence of people trying to agree on a story before the story got told for them. She had spent 14 months at this hospital, being unremarkable. It had been intentional. She had wanted the job, not the history. She had wanted to be a nurse, the specific kind of nurse that patients trusted and staff relied on. And she had built that deliberately. Not performing ordinariness, but genuinely pursuing it, genuinely choosing it, because the alternative was to spend the rest of her career explaining herself, and she was tired of explaining herself. And now the thing she'd left behind had come through the door at 4 a.m, and the man who'd tried to make her small was about to try to use it against her, which was the kind of irony that was too precise to be accidental and too ugly to be funny. Her phone buzzed. Alvarez. With Bryce now. You're right. Keep your phone on. She put the phone in her pocket. Down the corridor, the administrator's office door opened. Fitch came out, followed by a man she didn't recognize. Suited, briefcase, the compressed efficiency of someone who had come from somewhere else fast. Calder's contact, probably. Someone from the union's legal team or the PR firm or both. The boundaries between those things got blurry when the stakes got high enough. Fitch saw her. He stopped. The man with the briefcase looked between them and had the intelligence to say nothing. Fitch's face was doing several things at once, the way faces do when a person is processing competing pressures and hasn't yet resolved the hierarchy. She could see the administrator in him, the instinct to manage, to smooth, to find the version of the night that cost the hospital the least. She could also see something underneath it, something she might have called shame if she was being generous, and something else if she wasn't. "Ms. Hayes," he said. "Mr. Fitch." The corridor was not empty. A nurse was moving past at the far end, not looking at them, but listening. An orderly was pushing a cart in the direction of the elevators. These things were noted by everyone in the exchange and mentioned by no one. "I want you to know," Fitch said, "that the hospital takes tonight's incident very seriously." She looked at him steadily. "I know you've seen the footage." "I have." "And you know about the prior complaints." Something moved across his face, not quite a flinch. "Those were handled through appropriate channels, were they?" Her voice was not raised. It was very quiet, actually, which seemed to make him more uncomfortable than volume would have. "Because one of them has your signature on the resolution." The man with the briefcase shifted his weight. Fitch said nothing. "I'm not asking you to explain it right now," Olivia said. "I'm telling you that Detective Alvarez is currently taking a statement that includes that document. I think you should know that before you authorize anything this morning." She walked away. She didn't look back. She heard Fitch say something to the man with the briefcase, low and urgent. She heard the tone of it more than the words, the specific music of a recalculation happening fast, priorities being reshuffled. Good. Let him reshuffle. The math was getting cleaner the more data entered the room, and eventually the math would be undeniable. She found Dana at the nurse's station. Dana, who had stayed over, who was running on the same fuel as everyone else in this building at 7 in the morning, which was the fuel of something that needed finishing. "Web stable," Olivia told her. "I know. I talked to the recovery floor 20 minutes ago." Dana looked at her. "What's happening with Fitch?" "It's happening. That's not specific." "No," Olivia agreed. "It's not. But it's moving in the right direction." Dana looked at her for a long moment. "You should sit down for 10 minutes." "I'm fine." "You've been on your feet since 11 p.m. You're a nurse. You know what that means physiologically." "I know what it means." She stayed standing. "I'll sit down when this is done." Dana handed her a coffee. Not the machine kind, the good kind. Someone's personal French press that lived behind the station and was generally not shared except in circumstances that warranted it. Olivia accepted it without comment. At 7:43 a.m., Detective Alvarez came back into the building. He came directly to the nurse's station, which told Olivia something about his sense of where the relevant people were. He had the look of a man who had received information in the last 40 minutes that had compressed his timeline. "Bryce Odom's statement is on record," he said, quiet and direct. "Full account. The self-filed complaint, the security office interaction, what he observed of the holster movement, and Vaughn's conduct toward female staff members over the past year." He paused. He also provided documentation. "What documentation?" "Text exchanges. Between him and Vaughn, going back 8 months. Vaughn had a pattern of flagging specific nurses, always female, always younger, for what he called follow-up monitoring. 3 of those nurses are no longer employed at this hospital." Alvarez let that land. "We're looking at whether their departures were connected to Vaughn's pressure." Dana had gone very still at the nurse's station. She was listening without appearing to listen, which was a skill she'd probably developed over years of handling information in open clinical spaces. "And Fitch's sign-off," Olivia said, "the second complaint resolution, 8 months ago, female nurse, informal resolution, closed without investigation. Fitch signed off on Vaughn's account without interviewing the nurse involved." Alvarez looked at her. "She left the hospital 2 weeks later. I'm going to talk to her today." The shape of it was getting cleaner. Vaughn hadn't been operating in isolation. He'd been operating in a system that absorbed his behavior and closed the books on it, And Fitch, whether from laziness or something worse, had been the mechanism that made that possible. "Can you get the filing locked?" she said. "Before 9. "The filing is already locked," Alvarez said. "Board chair authorized an emergency hold on incident reclassification at 7:15. Nothing gets changed on the record without board review." She absorbed that. Holt had moved fast. "Calder. Calder's been informed. He's not happy." A pause that was almost dry. "That's my professional assessment." Nraft appeared from the direction of the main entrance, walking with Mossbridge, the two of them having a quiet, focused exchange that ended when they reached the nurse's station. Mossbridge looked at Alvarez. Alvarez looked at Mossbridge. The mutual assessment of two people from different institutional contexts arriving at the same event from different angles and finding they were, broadly, aimed at the same thing. "JAG has the military angle covered," Mossbridge said. "Webb's transport, the conditions of his arrival, my report. It's a parallel track, it won't interfere with the internal affairs process, but it creates a second institutional record that Vaughn can't get to." "Meaning," Nraft said, "that even if something goes sideways in the internal affairs process, there's a separate federal record of tonight's events that isn't subject to local sign-off authority." Alvarez nodded once. "That helps." "It was designed to," Mossbridge said. Olivia looked at all of them. These people who had arrived through different doors and different histories, and were now arranged around a nurse's station in a fluorescent-lit hospital at 7:40 in the morning, each of them holding a piece of the thing. She felt something that wasn't quite gratitude, because gratitude implied she'd needed rescuing, and she hadn't. She'd held the situation until the structure caught up with her, but it was something adjacent to gratitude. The specific feeling of not being alone in a problem after a long time of managing alone. She didn't say any of that. "What happens now?" she said. "Vaughn is going to be formally suspended pending investigation," Alvarez said. "That happens this morning, before noon. He'll be required to surrender his credentials and leave the hospital premises. Calder will contest it, that's standard, but with Bryce's statement and the footage, the grounds are solid." He looked at her directly. "He won't be back in this building." "And Fitch?" Alvarez was quiet for a moment. "Fitch is a separate matter. The prior complaint resolution is a performance and conduct issue, potentially a legal one depending on what the nurse's account looks like. That takes longer." He paused. "But it's moving." She nodded, and Raft watched her. "Do you want to be here for the suspension?" "No," she said. "I want to go home." A small silence. "Then go home," Raft said. She looked at him. There was something between them that still needed addressing. The 4 years and the history and the specific unresolved quality of people who had shared something extreme and then gone different directions. But it didn't need addressing right now, and they both understood that. "I'll call you," she said. "I'll answer," he said. She picked up her bag from the counter. She looked at Dana. "I'll be back tonight at 11. Dana opened her mouth. "I'll be back tonight at 11, Olivia repeated. "I'm fine. I'll sleep. I'll eat something. I'll be back at 11. Dana closed her mouth and nodded, and the nod said several things, the primary one being, "I will hold you to that." She walked out of the ER and through the main lobby and out the main entrance into the morning. Denver at 8 a.m. in early October had a specific quality. The light was low and sharp, the temperature still cold enough to mean it, the smell of the city cycling between exhaust and something cleaner underneath. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just breathing. Her car was in the staff lot around the back. She walked. She was halfway to the lot when her phone rang. Unknown number, different from Bryce's. She almost didn't answer it. Then she did. "Ms. Hayes." Female voice, professional, slightly clipped. "My name is Renata Solis. I'm a reporter with the Denver Courier. I'm calling because I've received information about an incident at Crestwood Regional Medical Center last night involving a police officer and a nurse, and I'd like to—" "No comment," Olivia said. "Ms. Hayes, I'm not going to publish anything without—" "I said no comment." She paused. "Not yet." A beat of silence. "Not yet," Solis repeated. "Talk to Detective Marcus Alvarez at Denver PD Internal Affairs. He'll have something on the record by end of day." She paused again. And look into the prior complaints. Both of them. She hung up. She got in her car. She sat there for a moment with both hands on the wheel and the engine off in the quiet of the car, which was a different kind of quiet than the hospital. Less managed, less purposeful. Just the ambient sound of a parking lot in the morning. Her hands were not shaking. They had not shaken once tonight. She noticed this the way she always noticed it. Not with pride exactly, but with the specific relief of someone whose body had kept its promise to her again. She started the engine and drove home. She lived in a second-floor apartment 12 minutes from the hospital. The building was not remarkable. Beige siding, a parking lot with 2 trees that had given up on growing symmetrically, a stairwell that smelled like the specific combination of cleaning product and old carpet. She had chosen it because it was close, because the bedroom was dark in the morning, and because the neighbor below her was a retired schoolteacher who went to bed at 9 and had never once knocked on her door. She made eggs. Not because she was particularly hungry, but because her body needed something, and eggs were fast, and she knew how to make them correctly without thinking about it, which was what she needed right now. A task that ran on autopilot so the rest of her could decompress. She ate standing at the kitchen counter, looking at the window that faced the parking lot, and she thought about Vaughn. Not with anger. The anger, if there'd been real anger, had been managed and filed away the same way she managed everything that needed managing. She thought about him in the way she sometimes thought about the mechanics of a bad outcome, where it started, what enabled it, what would have happened if the geometry had been different, if Webb hadn't been the patient, if Mossbridge hadn't made those calls, if the camera angle in the security office had been 2 feet to the left, if she'd been a different kind of person. She washed the plate. She went to bed. She slept for 6 hours, which was more than she'd expected. She woke up at 3 in the afternoon to 4 text messages and 1 missed call. The texts were from Dana, Mossbridge, and Raft, and a number she didn't immediately recognize. The missed call was from Alvarez. She called Alvarez first. He answered immediately. Vaughn was formally suspended at 11:47 a.m., he said. Credentials surrendered. He's been removed from the hospital. The suspension is pending formal investigation, which will take 4 to 6 weeks. And the investigation scope. Expanded. We're looking at the full duty log. 14 months at Crestwood, prior placements. Bryce Odom is cooperating fully. We've made contact with 2 of the 3 nurses who left after Vaughn's monitoring. A pause. Both of them have things to say. Fitch. Fitch has retained personal counsel, Alvarez said, which is his right. It also tells you something about what he thinks is coming. He paused. Ms. Hayes, I want you to know that the incident classification is locked. Your name appears in the record correctly, as the individual toward whom an officer displayed threatening behavior. Not as a subject of investigation, not as a complainant, not as anything that implies conduct on your part. That's the official record, and it's not changing. She sat with that for a moment. The specificity of it mattered more than she'd anticipated. Thank you, she said. One more thing, Alvarez said. The union. Calder filed a formal objection to the suspension this morning, which is expected. In the objection, he included language characterizing your military background as a potential factor in the incident. He let a measured pause land. That language was reviewed by JAG this afternoon and, I'm quoting the JAG response here, was found to be, and I'm reading exactly, factually unsupported, procedurally irrelevant, and inconsistent with the legal framework governing protected veteran status. She exhaled once, quietly. In other words, Alvarez said, they tried that door, and it was locked. After she hung up, she checked the other texts. Dana. Webb asked about you again. He's eating solid food, complaining about the pudding. Good sign. Mossbridge. Report submitted. Federal record sealed and on file. Call when you're rested. N. Raft. Flight home tomorrow. Coffee before I leave if you want. No pressure. She opened the 4th text from the unknown number. This is Petra Han. I worked at Crestwood until 9 months ago. Detective Alvarez gave me your number. I just wanted to say thank you for not letting it stay quiet. I tried. I didn't know how. Petra. Olivia read it twice. Then she set the phone down on the nightstand and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Petra Han. A name she didn't know, attached to a story she was only now beginning to understand the shape of. A woman who had tried to stay standing and had left instead. And Fitch had signed the paperwork and closed the book, and Vaughn had gone back to work the next week, and the week after that, and every week until tonight. She picked the phone back up. She typed, "You don't have to thank me. Talk to Alvarez. Tell him everything. That's how this finishes." She sent it. Then she got up, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open, because there was something she needed to do that she hadn't done yet, and the afternoon was still there, and the coffee was strong, and she was finally sitting down. She pulled up the Crestwood staff portal and navigated to the incident reporting section. She had filed her own report at 6:40 a.m. before she left. She opened it now and read through it. Her account, her words, the sequence she'd given Alvarez rendered in the institutional language of incident documentation. At the bottom of the form was a field she'd left blank this morning. Additional context or supporting information. She thought about what to write. She thought about Petra Han. She thought about the two other nurses. She thought about 14 months of being unremarkable and what had been happening in the same building during those 14 months that she hadn't seen because she'd been looking at her patients. She typed, "It is my understanding that the incident on the morning of October 9th was not an isolated event. I request that this report be formally linked to prior incident reports involving Officer D. Vaughn at this facility, and that those reports be reviewed in the context of a pattern of conduct rather than as individual incidents." She submitted it. She closed the laptop. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. The text was from Petra Han. "I already called him. He answered. I've been on the phone for 40 minutes. I think he believed me." Olivia set the phone face down and drank her coffee. Outside, Denver was doing what October afternoons in Denver did. The light was going gold and flat, the temperature dropping faster than made logical sense, the particular compressed quality of a day ending before you'd quite finished with it. She was 3 hours from her next shift when her personal email notification lit up on her phone. She didn't check it immediately. She finished her coffee. Then she checked it. The sender was Patricia Holt. The subject line was, "Regarding tonight's scheduled personnel meeting. Urgent." She opened it. "Ms. Hayes, please be advised that at the request of hospital administration and in consultation with the board chair, a formal review meeting has been scheduled for 9 p.m. tonight, 1 hour before your scheduled shift. Attendees will include hospital legal, a representative from Denver PD, and members of hospital administration. Your attendance is requested. Please confirm receipt." She read it twice. A personnel meeting at 9 p.m. 1 hour before her shift, called by hospital administration after a day in which Fitch had retained personal counsel and the board chair had locked the incident classification and the union had tried one door and found it locked. The language was careful, requested, not required. Review meeting, not disciplinary meeting. But the timing was specific and Fitch's name wasn't on the email, which told her who wasn't in the room. She typed back, "Confirmed. I'll be there." She put the phone down. She thought about calling Raft. Then she thought about who else needed to know, and she picked the phone back up and called Mossbridge instead. Mossbridge answered on the second ring. Olivia read her the email. Silence on the other end. The specific silence of someone processing information and arriving at a conclusion. Then Mossbridge said, "What time did it come in?" 4:52. That's 40 minutes after Fitch's attorney made contact with the board chair's office. Another pause. "Olivia, this isn't a disciplinary meeting." "I know. The board chair called this, not Fitch." Mossbridge's voice had changed. Not warmer, exactly, but more certain. "This is the formal step, the one where they put it on record officially. You should have someone with you." "I was going to ask if you were available." "I'm available," Mossbridge said immediately. "What time do you need me there?" 8:45. "I'll be there at 8:30. A pause. "Get some more sleep if you can. You're going to want to be sharp for this one." Olivia said she would. She hung up. She looked at the ceiling again. The apartment was quiet around her. The particular quiet of a weekday afternoon when the building was mostly empty. The retired school teacher somewhere below her, the parking lot trees outside doing their uneven best. She thought about the 9 p.m. meeting. She thought about Fitch and his attorney and the board chair and what formal step actually meant in institutional language. She thought about Vaughn in whatever room he was sitting in right now, credentials surrendered, suspended, 14 months of pattern beginning to surface like a structure that had been underwater and was now, slowly, becoming visible. And she thought about Petra Han on the phone with Alvarez for 40 minutes, saying the things she'd tried to say 9 months ago when there was no footage and no Mossbridge and no web, and no one had seen the security camera angle in time. She lay back down. She set her alarm for 7:30. She was almost asleep when her phone buzzed one more time. She looked at it without picking it up. It was from Nraft. Heads up. Fitch's attorney made a call to the board at 4:15, before Holt's email to you. The meeting tonight isn't what the email says it is. She stared at the ceiling. It's not a review meeting, the next text read. The board chair is terminating Fitch's authority as of midnight tonight. The meeting at 9 is to inform you officially and to offer you a formal apology on behalf of the hospital. She read it 3 times. Then a final text from Nraft. One more thing. The board chair's name is Margaret Osei. She used to be an ER nurse, 22 years. Thought you'd want to know that before you walked in the room. She put the phone face down on the nightstand and lay in the dark for a while, not sleeping, not quite thinking, existing in the specific suspended state between exhaustion and the kind of alertness that won't fully release. Margaret Osei, former ER nurse. 22 years. She turned that over once quietly and then let it go. It wasn't comfort exactly. It wasn't reassurance. It was just a fact that landed differently than most facts did, with a particular kind of weight that she couldn't have articulated cleanly but didn't need to. She slept for another hour. Real sleep this time. The kind without the half-listening qualities she'd developed from years of being the person in a forward position who needed to hear what was coming before it arrived. When her alarm went off at 7:30, she felt it. Not rested, not exactly, but reset. The difference between a battery that was dead and a battery that had enough. She showered. She dressed in her own clothes, not scrubs, because the meeting was before her shift, and she wanted the distinction to be visible. Dark jeans, a gray sweater, boots that had some age on them. She looked in the mirror and saw what she usually saw, a tired person who was functional, which was sufficient. She made more coffee. She drank it standing at the counter again, the same window, the same parking lot, the same 2 trees. She thought about Petra Han. She thought about the other 2 nurses whose names she still didn't know, who had left this hospital after Vaughn had filed paperwork on them, and Fitch had signed the resolution, and the books had been closed, and everyone had moved on. She thought about what it cost a person to leave a job they'd built, a position they'd earned, because the mechanism that was supposed to protect them had instead protected the man targeting them. She thought about the specific arithmetic of that, what it took from you. And she thought about how she'd spent 14 months being careful about being invisible, and how that invisibility had not, in the end, protected her either. There was something in that worth sitting with, not bitterness, something more useful. She rinsed the cup, picked up her bag, left. Mossbridge was in the hospital lobby at 8:28, which was 2 minutes earlier than she'd said, standing near the entrance with a coffee she'd brought in from somewhere outside the building because she'd correctly assessed the quality of the hospital machine. She handed one to Olivia without commentary. "Board chair is already here," Mossbridge said. "Second floor conference room. Different one than this morning." "Who else?" "Holt, Sandra Boo, a man from the board I don't know, and Alvarez, which I didn't expect, but his presence is good." Olivia drank the coffee. It was significantly better than the machine version. "Fitch." "Not in the meeting. I was told he's in the building. His personal effects are being collected from his office." Mossbridge paused. "He submitted a resignation letter at 6 p.m. Under pressure, but submitted." "And Vaughn?" "Not here. He won't be back on these premises." Another pause, shorter. Calder withdrew the formal objection to the suspension at 5:30. The union reviewed the full body of evidence, Bryce's statement, the texts, the footage, the prior complaints, and they withdrew. Olivia absorbed that. The union pulling back was the clearest signal yet of how the weight had shifted, because unions didn't pull back without calculating that the ground beneath their position was no longer solid. The other nurses. "Alvarez spoke with 2 of them today. Both are cooperating. The third, the one from longest ago, Alvarez is still trying to reach. Mossbridge looked at her directly. This isn't over for them. The formal investigation is going to take time, but it's moving, and it's moving because the record is clean and airtight, and nobody can quietly resolve it anymore. They stood for a moment in the lobby, the specific quality of two people who had arrived at the same destination from very different distances and were acknowledging that without making it larger than it was. "Ready," Olivia said. It wasn't a question. They went up. The second-floor conference room was the larger one, the one with windows that faced the city rather than the parking structure, and at 8:52 it held 6 people arranged around the long table with the particular geometry of a formal proceeding that was trying not to feel punitive. Holt was there, with her notepad. Sandra Boo, hospital legal. A board member named Terrence Aldrich, who had the composed, careful energy of someone who had been briefed extensively and was here to listen. Alvarez, in the same clothes he'd been wearing that morning, looking like a man who had been working for 16 hours straight and was going to work for several more. And at the head of the table, Margaret Osei. She was 61. She had the posture of someone who had spent decades on their feet and whose body had stopped apologizing for it. Her hair was silver and natural, her suit dark blue, her hands folded on the table in front of her with the stillness of a person who had learned a long time ago that power didn't need to announce itself. She looked at Olivia when she came through the door, the way she might look at an X-ray. Not coldly, but with the complete attention of someone reading for information rather than impression. Olivia sat down. Mossbridge took the chair to her left. Osei spoke first. "Ms. Hayes, I want to begin by saying directly and on the record that the events of last night represent a failure of this institution's duty to its staff. A failure that was not isolated to last night and that will not be addressed by last night's actions alone." She paused. "I want you to hear that before anything else is said in this room." Olivia looked at her. "I heard it. Do you have questions you want answered before we proceed?" She thought about it honestly. Not the reflex of saying no because no was easier. The actual question of what she still needed to understand. "The prior complaints," she said. "The ones before last night. What happens to the nurses who tried to report and were closed out?" Osei didn't hesitate. "The board is commissioning an independent review of all complaint resolutions involving Officer Vaughn during his contract with this hospital. Any nurse who filed or attempted to file a complaint that was informally resolved without investigation will be contacted personally. If there's compensable harm, we will address it." She paused. "That's a commitment from the board, not from administration. It doesn't go through channels that Fitch controlled." Olivia nodded. "The review will take time," Osei continued. "I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but it will be thorough, and it will not be quiet." Alvarez, from his end of the table, added without looking up from his notepad. "The department investigation runs parallel. Vaughn is suspended without pay, and based on the evidence collected today, the likelihood of reinstatement anywhere in the Denver PD system is low." He glanced up. "The texts alone are going to make that very difficult for the union to argue around." Olivia looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked up. "What happened to Fitch? The resignation? Was that his choice?" Osei's expression shifted fractionally, not softening exactly. More like the face of someone who had seen enough of institutional machinery to recognize when someone else saw it clearly too. "Gerald Fitch has been an administrator here for 9 years, she said. "He made choices during those years that prioritized the path of least institutional resistance over the protection of his staff. When the evidence of that was presented to the board, we made clear that there was no version of his continued tenure that we could defend to ourselves, to our staff, or to the public." A pause. "He submitted the resignation. We accepted it immediately. Is there a legal consequence for him?" "That's being reviewed," Boo said, careful and precise. "The sign-off on the prior complaint resolution is a potential liability issue depending on what the independent review finds. That process is separate from the employment action." Aldrich, the board member who had been silent until now, said, "Ms. Hayes, I want to add, the board was not aware of the pattern. I want that stated clearly because the distinction matters. We were not aware, and when we were made aware, we acted within hours." He paused. "That doesn't excuse the system that made us unaware. But I want you to understand that this is not a room full of people trying to protect what happened." She looked at him. She believed him, or believed enough of it to work with. Institutional accountability was rarely clean, and she'd known that before she walked into this room. What mattered was whether the current was moving in the right direction and whether it would keep moving when the immediate pressure dissipated. Those things she couldn't know with certainty. She could only watch. "I have one more question," she said. Osei waited. "My position here, my record." "Your record at this hospital is clean," Osei said, "and has been noted formally as such in the official incident documentation. Your personnel file will reflect that last night's events resulted in a finding against Officer Vaughn, not against you." She looked at her with the directness of someone who understood what the real question was. "You're not being moved to a different shift. You're not being assigned a different unit. You will return to the ER overnight rotation, which is where you built your record and where you have the full confidence of your department." The room was quiet. Olivia looked at her hands for a moment. The same hands that had done their job the previous night, that had not shaken, that had kept moving through all of it. "Okay," she said. "Thank you." Osei nodded. Then, with a shift in register that was small but distinct, away from official towards something that was still professional but occupied a different register. "I worked the overnight ER for 11 years before I went into administration. St. Agatha's, on the south side, before it merged." She paused. "I know what it costs. Overnight ER, what it asks of you every single shift." Another pause. "I also know that the people who do it well do it because they've decided something about what they're willing to be, and they don't undecide it easily." Olivia met her eyes. "You didn't undecide it last night," Osei said, "under circumstances that would have made it reasonable to." Olivia said nothing for a moment. Then, "Someone tried to make me smaller than I am. I've never been particularly good at going along with that." Something moved across Osei's face. Not a smile. Too much had happened tonight for a smile to be the right instrument, but something that recognized something. The meeting concluded at 9:22. Documents were signed. Olivia's formal clearance, the incident reclassification on the official record, an acknowledgement of the board's independent review commitment. Holt witnessed. Bow notarized. When it was done and the room was beginning to empty, Mossbridge touched her arm, brief and light. "I'm heading out. Webb's being moved to a step-down room tomorrow, and I need to coordinate transport back to post when he's cleared." "Tell him the pudding gets better on day 3, Olivia said. "It doesn't, but tell him anyway." Mossbridge looked at her for a moment, and whatever she was going to say, she seemed to decide against it and nodded instead, which was its own kind of communication. She left. Alvarez stopped on his way out. "The investigation is going to surface things over the next few weeks. There may be additional statements needed from you. I'll give you as much notice as I can." "I know how these things work," she said. "I'll be available." He nodded once, the nod of a man who had heard that before and was deciding she meant it. He left. She stood in the empty conference room for a minute, looking at the windows. Denver at 9:30 p.m. had its own light. The city's ambient glow against the October dark, the flatness of the plains somewhere beyond the buildings, the particular sense of a place that had been built quickly and kept building regardless of what it was building on top of. She'd driven to this city 14 months ago with 2 bags and a forwarding address, and the intention of being ordinary for a while, of choosing a life that was hers by decision rather than by assignment. She'd done that. She was still doing it. It had just turned out that ordinary was not as quiet as she'd planned, which was possibly something she should have anticipated. She went downstairs, changed into her scrubs, started her shift 40 minutes early because there was already a full board, and Dana, who was on again, looked at her when she came through the door with the expression of a woman who had prepared several arguments for sending her home and was reassessing them all. "You're early," Dana said. "Board's full." "I have it covered." "I know you do. I'm here anyway." She picked up the nearest chart. "Which bay needs eyes?" Dana looked at her for another 3 seconds, long enough to complete whatever internal negotiation she was running. Then, "Bay 7, 40-year-old female, migraine, 3rd visit this month. She's been waiting 40 minutes and she's not happy." "Is the lighting dimmed in there?" No. That's why she's not happy. She was already moving. I've got it. The woman in Bay 7 was named Teresa, and she was lying with her forearm over her eyes and the specific stillness of someone in significant pain who had learned to go very quiet inside it. The overhead light was at full intensity, which was a straightforward oversight on someone's part. Olivia dimmed it before she said a word. Teresa moved her arm and looked at her with the raw nerve look of someone emerging from pain into slightly less pain. "Third time this month," Olivia said, pulling the chart. "Are you keeping a diary?" "A what?" "A headache diary, tracking triggers, duration, severity. It helps with the treatment picture." "Nobody told me to do that." "I'm telling you now." She checked the IV site from the triage nurse, clean and well placed. Checked the vitals. "Have you eaten today?" "I can't eat before it started," Teresa thought. "Coffee, that was it." "Okay." She made a note. "We're going to get your pain managed first, and then I want to talk to you about a neurology referral. 3 visits in a month isn't ER territory anymore. It's specialist territory, and you deserve someone who has the full picture." Teresa looked at her. The look of a person who had been in and out of ERs enough to have a baseline expectation for how these interactions went, and who was recalibrating. "You think it's something serious?" "I think it's something that deserves more attention than an ER can give it at 11 p.m., Olivia said. "Which is different." She met her eyes. "You're not being dismissed. I'm trying to get you the right level of care." Teresa looked at her for another moment, then lay back and said, "Okay." Olivia ordered the medication, flagged the neurology referral for the morning team, and moved to the next bay. This was the work. This was what she'd come here for, what she'd chosen, what she kept choosing every time she walked through these doors. Not the drama of the previous night. That had happened, and it had mattered, and it would continue to matter in the ways it needed to matter. But it wasn't the thing. This was the thing. Teresa in Bay 7, the chest pain in Bay 2, the kid with the broken wrist in Bay 4 who was crying more about his mother's reaction than the actual wrist. The elderly man in Bay 6 who had come in alone at midnight with a blood pressure of 178/104, and who, when she asked who she could call, said with a particular kind of flat honesty that there wasn't anyone. She sat with him for 4 minutes while his medication started working, not performing comfort, just present. He talked about his daughter in Albuquerque, who he hadn't seen in 2 years. He talked about the job he'd retired from, something with water treatment, and she asked a question about it because she actually wanted to know, and he lit up in the specific way people do when they realize someone is actually listening rather than waiting for the end of the sentence. When his pressure came down to 154 and his color improved, he said, "You're good at this." She said, "So are you, at talking." He laughed, surprised, a real laugh that loosened something in his face. "Nobody tells me that." "I'm telling you now," she said. "Call your daughter." She moved on. At 1:15 a.m., Dana appeared at her elbow with the expression she got when she had something to say that she'd been holding for a while. "The parking lot camera footage," she said. Olivia waited. "The one outside the ER entrance. The one we don't usually pull for internal incidents." Dana's voice was careful. Holt's team pulled it as part of the full documentation. It picked up at 2:03 a.m., before any of the internal footage. It picked up Vaughn arriving early, 40 minutes before his official sign-in time. She processed that. He was in the building before his shift started. "He signed in at 2:45, Dana said. "The parking lot footage has him entering the building at 2:03, which means he was here before the complaint, before the approach. The arithmetic was clean and ugly. He was already in the building when I came out of the trauma bay." "He may have been watching the board," Dana said, "waiting for the right moment." She paused. "Alvarez was notified an hour ago." Olivia looked down the corridor for a moment. The premeditation of it, not just the pattern over 14 months, but tonight specifically, the timing, the manufactured complaint, the specific targeting, landed with a weight that was different from everything else because it confirmed something she'd felt but hadn't had evidence for. That this had not been random, that she had not been an opportunistic target, that he had seen her specifically as someone he could do this to. Why her? She couldn't say with certainty. Maybe the overnight shift created opportunity. Maybe something in her manner that first week had registered to him as the kind of person who could be managed. Maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe she'd said something early on that didn't fold the way he expected, and that had been enough. It didn't matter now. The why was for the investigation. What mattered was the record, which was clean and growing cleaner, and Vaughn, who would not be back in this building, and Petrahan, who had talked to Alvarez for 40 minutes, and the two other nurses whose names she still didn't know, but who were talking now, finally, to someone who was going to do something with what they said. "Thank you," she told Dana. Dana nodded and moved away to the thing she was actually needed for, which was the board, which was always full. At 3 a.m., Olivia got a text from Enraft. At the airport, flights at 6, that coffee offer still stands if you're somewhere near a window. She was at the nurses' station. She looked at the large windows that faced the ambulance bay, the parking lot visible beyond it, the street with its diesel and morning smell that she'd come to know as the smell of this specific hour. She typed back, "I'm at a window. Not going anywhere, but I'm at a window." A pause. Then, "Good enough." Another pause. Then, "You did well, Olivia." She looked at the message for a moment. From Enraft, those 3 words carried a specific weight. Not because he gave them out easily, which he didn't, but because he had been in enough situations to know the difference between performing well and doing something genuinely hard in the way it needed to be done. She typed, "So did you. Thank you for coming." She put the phone in her pocket. At 4:40 a.m., she went up to the surgical step-down floor. Webb was awake. He was apparently a poor sleeper in any context that wasn't a forward position, which tracked. He was propped up, hospital food tray pushed to the side, watching something on his phone with the volume very low. He looked up when she came in. "You're on shift," he said. "Break." She pulled the chair from the corner and sat down, not bedside exactly, but close enough for a real conversation. "How's the pain?" "Managed." He tilted his head slightly. "The meeting went okay?" "Word travels." "Mossbridge texted me." She looked at him. He looked like someone who was healing, which was different from how he'd looked at 2 a.m., more himself, less suspended in crisis. The eyes were clearer. "It went okay," she said. "The administrator resigned. Vaughn stays suspended. The prior complaints are under investigation." "And you?" "I'm on shift." She paused. "I'm fine." He studied her the way he had in the trauma bay, that cataloging look. "You know what I kept thinking about today," he said. "In recovery. In and out. Tell me." "Konar," he said. "Not the op itself. After. When they finally got us out and we were on the bird and you were... I don't know what you were doing. You were still working. Donahue was stable by then, or stable enough. And you were still working, checking everything, and someone asked you how you were doing and you said..." He paused, like he was trying to get the words exactly right. "You said, 'I'll figure that out later.'" She remembered. Not the specific words. She hadn't remembered the specific words. But the feeling of them, the truth of them. The way they'd come out not as deflection, but as honest accounting. "This is what I'm doing now, and the other thing I'll get to when I can." "I said that a lot," she said. "Yeah." He looked at her. "You still say it. Still works." He was quiet for a moment, then, "What made you become a nurse?" "After." It was the same question Mossbridge had asked, and she gave him a version of the same answer, but different. Different because Webb was different, because he'd been in the valley, because he understood what after meant in the way that only certain people did. "I needed to keep doing the work," she said, "and I needed the work to feel like it was building something instead of just holding a line." She thought about it. "Out there, you hold the line. You hold it, and sometimes the line moves back anyway. Here." She glanced toward the door, toward the floor and the hospital below it, the ER and the patients and the board and the work. "Here, when it goes right, someone goes home. That's the whole thing. Someone goes home who wasn't going to." Webb nodded slowly. "And when it goes wrong," she continued, "you know why. You can usually trace it. It's not a mortar round from a position you can't locate. It's a process that broke somewhere, or a call that was wrong, or something that can be learned from. She paused. I needed the kind of work where what happened made sense, even the bad parts. Does it? Webb said. Makes sense. She thought about Vaughn, about Fitch, about the 14 months during which a pattern had been operating in this building that she had not seen, about the nurses who had tried to report it and been quietly walked out the door. Not always, she said. But the work does. The actual work does. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. Donahue's daughter is named Mara, he said, out of nowhere and also not out of nowhere. She's 2. He sends me pictures sometimes. He paused. He named her after the medic who kept him alive. Olivia looked at him. Her middle name, Webb clarified, Mara Olivia Donahue. She was quiet for a moment. He was going to tell you himself, Webb said, but he doesn't have your contact and I do now, so. He shrugged, the careful shrug of someone with abdominal stitches being conservative about range of motion. Thought you should know. She looked at the hospital tray, the pushed-aside food, the monitor showing his vitals in steady, reassuring numbers. She felt the weight of it. The Konar Valley and 6 hours and a helicopter that had to pull out early, and a man who had lived and had a daughter and had given her a name that meant something, and the specific strange gratitude of a life that echoes forward through other lives in ways you don't always get to see. Tell him I said thank you, she said. You can tell him yourself, Webb said. He's going to want to. Maybe, she said. Maybe he will. She stood up, checked his IV line one more time. Not because it needed checking, because the habit was real, and so was the care behind it. Sleep, she said. You heal faster when you sleep. That's debatable. It's not actually. It's well documented. I'll look it up. You do that, she said, and left him there in the low light of the step-down room, already reaching for his phone in the particular way of someone who was going to look it up, and also was not going to sleep yet. And that was fine, because he was healing, and the numbers were good, and some things you couldn't manage more than you'd already managed them. She went back downstairs. The ER at 4:50 in the morning was in its particular late rhythm. Not slow, never slow, but different from midnight, different from 2 a.m. The board had 4 patients. The waiting room had 2. The city was doing what it did in this hour, holding its breath slightly between what the night had been and what the morning was going to be. She stood at the nurse's station for a moment, looking at the board. Teresa in Bay 7 had been discharged an hour ago, migraine-controlled, neurology referral in the system. The man from Bay 6 who had no one to call had been admitted for observation, his pressure down to 138, his daughter in Albuquerque notified by the unit coordinator. The kid with the broken wrist had gone home with his mother, who had been significantly calmer than he'd anticipated. This was the accounting, not the clean version, the real version, imperfect outcomes and incomplete information and decisions made with what was available in the moment. People going home who might not have. People staying who needed to. The endless forward motion of a place that did not stop for anything. Not for violence in the corridor, not for administrative failure, not for the specific weight of a night that had been harder than most. She picked up the next chart. She was still working at 6:45 when the morning shift began arriving. Priya again, because Priya was on the same rotation, and she came through the doors and looked at the board and looked at Olivia and said, "Good night?" Olivia considered it. The honest answer was complicated. The honest answer involved Vaughn and Fitch and Bryce and Petra Han and Webb in the recovery room, and Mara Olivia Donahue, who was 2 years old and had never met the person her middle name belonged to. It involved a camera angle and a union rep pulling back at 5:30, and a board chair who had spent 22 years on her feet before she ran anything, and who had looked at Olivia across a conference room table and said, "You didn't undecide it. It involved a lot." "Productive," Olivia said. Priya gave her a look that said she'd heard that word used that way before and knew what it meant. She didn't push. She just nodded and took her first chart and moved down the corridor, because that was the job, and the job kept going. Olivia collected her things from the locker room, stood at the mirror again, same mirror, different morning. She looked at what she looked like. Still tired, still functional, still the specific version of herself that she'd been building deliberately and carefully for 14 months in this city. Unchanged in the ways that mattered. but not untouched. That was a different thing. She'd been in a corridor at 2 in the morning with a man who had decided she was easy, who had looked at her scrubs and her badge and her tired eyes, and done the calculation and decided there was nothing behind them worth taking seriously. And she had stood in that corridor and not gone smaller, and it had cost something. It had cost 14 months of careful invisibility, and a shift she'd finished reading about in paperwork, and a set of experiences she didn't plan to spend a lot of time talking about, but would carry anyway because that was how it worked. You carried it. But she was still here, still clocked in, still the person who dimmed the lights in Bay 7 before she said a word. And Vaughn was somewhere else, in whatever room people went to when the thing they'd counted on to make them untouchable turned out to have a weight limit. She dried her hands. She thought about the nurses she didn't know yet, the ones who had tried and left, who were talking to Alvarez now, who would have to tell their stories into official channels and wait for the slow machinery of institutional accountability to do what it did when it was actually working. That would not be easy. It would not be fast. Some of it would be incomplete in ways she couldn't prevent. But the record was there. The footage was there. And sometimes the most important thing you could do for the people who came after you was refuse to let the record get revised. She walked out of the locker room, through the ER, through the main lobby, out into the morning. Denver at 7 a.m. had the specific quality of a city that was starting again, as cities do, without waiting for anyone to be ready. The light was coming in low and hard from the east. The street smelled like coffee from somewhere, and exhaust from everywhere, and the cold clean underneath that was the high altitude doing what it did. The 2 trees in the staff parking lot were doing their asymmetric best. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just breathing. There was no version of what had happened that was clean. There was no version where the right people suffered exactly the right consequences in exactly the right proportion, and everyone who had been harmed was fully made whole, and the system that had enabled it was fixed in a way that would never allow it again. That version didn't exist, and she had too much experience with how things actually went to have expected it. What existed was this: a record that couldn't be rewritten, a man who would not be back in this building, a board that was now paying attention, and 3 nurses who were talking instead of being quiet. What existed was Webb upstairs getting stronger, and Donahue in a house somewhere with a 2-year-old who had a name. What existed was the ER behind her, which was full, which was always full, which needed people who could do the work without breaking and without pretending the work wasn't hard. She was one of those people. She had been one of those people for a long time, in different rooms, in different uniforms, under different kinds of pressure. That hadn't changed. She hadn't changed, not in the ways that mattered, because the things that were real about her had never been the things Vaughn saw when he looked at her. He saw a tired nurse. She was that. She was also everything else. She walked to her car. There is a specific kind of person who learns, early or late, that the only version of themselves worth being is the complete one, the one that doesn't edit out the difficult parts to make other people comfortable, the one that doesn't make itself smaller to fit inside someone else's idea of what it should be. Those people are not always recognized immediately. They are often underestimated, sometimes targeted, frequently required to prove what should have been assumed. The proof is exhausting. The requirement is unjust. But the thing about that kind of person is that the underestimation never actually touches them at the center, because the center is built out of something that doesn't require outside confirmation to be real. You can dismiss it. You can point a weapon at it in a hospital corridor at 2 in the morning. You can try to rewrite the record. It stays. Olivia Hayes started her car. She pulled out of the lot. She drove into the morning, which was continuing without asking her permission, the way mornings did, the way everything she valued most did. Not waiting to be recognized, just doing the work, being what it was, moving forward, regardless. The sun was up. She had 8 hours until her next shift. She was going to use them.